Hey, good to see you. Oops, there we go. Paul is Japanese style, arriving just on time, like the Japanese, warehouses. What do they call it? Just on time. You know what I'm talking about, Paul? The factories have all of the ingredients or all of the components of the things arrive at the factory just at the right time, so they don't have to store them, sort of Japanese style. Okay, so
And I'll put that link in the chat.
okay, so uh, Sean is putting in a link in the chat to a message from His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the Theravada monks, almost all of them Theravada monks who walked those thousands of miles from Texas to Washington, D.C. There was a photo also. I think Ron, you sent me the photo of the monk facing I'm not sure which way he was facing. Was he facing the monument? I think the Lincoln Memorial was behind him and the big tall monument. What is that called in Washington?
The Washington Monument.
The Washington Monument. Is
Or
that
is
so?
it the Trump Monument now?
So there was a huge crowd, absolutely huge crowd. So it's very encouraging. Okay, so let's try to set motivation for our Gompa Rapso class. Sangye chodang soki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sognam ki trola penshir sangye dupasho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create, through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit migrating beings. Sangye churang soke chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sognam ki drola penshir sangye drupa shok. So when taking refuge and generating bodhicitta like that, you should have your hands in the mudra of request and respect. And usually, Lama Zopa explained, I think you've heard many times, in the Mahayana tradition, the two thumbs are not outside there; they're put sort of inside the palm, uh, sort of representational of the two bodhicittas, the conventional bodhicitta and the ultimate bodhicitta within the lotus of your heart, sort of like Om Mani Padme Hum. And then offering a short mandala. Sajipoki Chukshing Meto Tram Rirab Lingji Nide Genpadi Sangye Shingdu Mikte Uargi Drokun Nam Dakshing La Chupashu. Holy and perfect pure lamas from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdoms, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be subdued, those to be trained. Idam Guru Rana Mandalakam Niryatayami. Okay, so let's try to solidify that remembering consciousness of those concepts, refuge, bodhicitta, guru devotion, and so forth. Solidify that with some formal meditation, first focusing on the breathing and then on the nature of the mind to reset our consciousness. Right now, there might be many thoughts going through it. So to eliminate those, focusing on the breathing that you recognize in front, then with the mental factor mindfulness and the little mental spy of introspection, watch that breathing without controlling it. At the beginning, you want to be using introspection almost continually, making sure that you're not multitasking, you're not letting other thoughts enter your mind, but are just being mindful of the respiration. Later on during the meditation, if you were to do it for some time, you can just check sporadically with the introspection or the mental spy. In some Theravada traditions, this close placement of mindfulness on the breathing, satipatthana, when, say, an uncomfortable feeling arises, say your shoulders are tight or your tummy is upset or you feel an ache in your body somewhere, one is advised not to do anything about that, just to let it, just to observe it and let it play out. Here, we try to cut it off from the beginning. So if you notice your mind wandering to some uncomfortable feeling in your body, it would be comfortable or, something blissful. Bring your attention back to the heart chakra, sort of withdrawing your attention to the sense input by withdrawing their wings to the heart, like a turtle withdrawing its limbs into its shell. When doing this kind of meditation by yourself and you have leisure, the time, you can continue watching the breathing for some time until its mind is very settled. Not then to turn the mind to the more subtle object of the mental consciousness. That's more subtle in the sense it's difficult to find. The mental consciousness is formless, clear light, is not an evident or obvious or manifest object. One first understands it through observing its contents, thoughts, and recognizing how they propel themselves into the mind and reabsorb back in without any hindrance from the mind, without any obstruction from the mind. The mind has that meaning of clear light here, meaning the non-obstructing quality of the mind. This is our developmental Buddha nature. The conventional clear light nature of the mind. As a similitude to the ultimate clear light nature of the mind, the emptiness of the mind, in that both of them are non-affirming negations. There's another aspect of the clear light nature of the mind, which is a positive quality, but we're not focusing on that right now. Having a glimpse of this, or an insight or an intuition about this developmental nature, we should feel some joy that we can develop qualities that we don't yet have. We can get rid of our faults, laziness and attachment and pride and jealousy and so forth, anger. The fact that right at this very moment that we can have that insight is due to this being an auspicious moment of leisure and endowment. that we ordinarily don't think about or appreciate, but Lord Buddha emphasized and again the great usefulness or meaning of this life of leisure and endowment. When we talk about the meaning of life, sort of like the meaning of this clear light nature, the goal of this clear light nature is to achieve liberation from cyclic existence, nirvana, or more deeply to achieve enlightenment, which we could achieve even in one short lifetime of this degenerate age through the practice of highest yoga tantra, or with the lower tantras extending our lifespan through various practices. The Buddha advised us, those of sharp intellect, sharp faculties, not to be satisfied with his lesser vehicle, his fiat mini hinayana teachings alone. They should be understood and practiced, but not brought to completion in nirvana. But instead, one should strive for ownership of the Mahayana, the great vehicle that takes us to the great destination and is a great vehicle in that it has room for all mother sentient beings. Room enough for everyone. Having heard those teachings and those admonitions of the Buddha to strive for that, we first recognize that to do that, we need to have a sense of heartfelt enjoyment or pleasure when we view mother sentient beings, heartwarming love for them. All of those beings, even if are enemies right now or strangers, have been intimately related to us in the past, have been kind, are kind, will be kind. And on the basis of that heartwarming love, to develop great compassion, an empathy with them, feeling their suffering, and wanting them just as we want to be free of suffering and want to be always in the state of pleasure. All mother sentient beings desire the same thing. They are capable of developing that. They all have Buddha nature, conventional and ultimate Buddha natures. They all are deserving. There's no one who doesn't deserve to feel pleasure and ultimate pleasure. This can lead to the thought of exceptional resolve, laksam, the thought that I myself will lead sentient beings out of suffering and into this everlasting happiness of enlightenment. I alone will do that. But in order to actualize that thought of Buddha that comes next, the bodhicitta, we need to have an extensive collection of merit and wisdom, which are also necessary for the end goal of achieving that, to achieve enlightenment. collection of merit and wisdom are explained in the Buddhist teachings, especially the Paramita teachings, perfection of wisdom teachings, as expounded by Nagarjuna and further explained by Chandrakirti in his Madhyamakavatara and his Prasanapada, commenting on Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, especially. Lama Tsongkhapa recasts that hundreds of years later, and we ourselves are studying that Gompa Rapso by Lama Tsongkhapa to understand how to develop these two collections of merit and wisdom, especially the collection of wisdom, which overlaps with our collection of merit. So think I'm going to participate today in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all mother sentient beings. That's the reason I'm aiming there, not simply for my own achievement of the highest goal. Let's say thinking that Dharmakaya that experiences uncontaminated bliss continually, that's what I want, forgetting the goal of achieving that state for the sake of sentient beings. That won't bring about that goal. Simply that goal to achieve my own happiness, but by aiming for the ability to emanate and lead sentient beings out of suffering into happiness, we will find along the way our own ultimate happiness of Dharmakaya. So think, I'm going to participate, listen, contemplate, and meditate on the material with the purpose of achieving enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. Yeah. So, when you see Subhash has arrived, KT is here. Or she reminds me, her name is actually Katie, but I always think of her as KT. So good to see you. Yeah. Before we begin, anyone have any questions? Yeah, KT.
I had two quick questions. One was last week you mentioned mind training and you mentioned, I believe, Gomo Tulku.
Right.
Is this the book you were mentioning, 7 Steps to Train the Mind?
I think so. I misspoke last week and said it was his commentary on the 8 verses of training the mind. And Doris messaged me afterwards and said, George, do you mean his commentary on the 7 verses? And then it was like one of those face planting moments. Oh, yes, not the 8 verses, on the 7 verses of training the mind. So his commentary on that is translated in that text. Does it say by Gomotuku and translated by Joan Neisel, Venerable Joan Neisel? Katie?
Yes,
Yeah.
there it is.
There's the text. Yeah. So that's I thought that might be appropriate because he was motivated to seek advice from his guru Trijang Rinpoche when things were going badly for him. And Trijang Rinpoche said, you need to train the mind, and one good way of training the mind is to review the 7-point training of the mind. And you are a scholar, you should write a commentary on that, accumulate merit. And as a result of that, things became much more manageable for Gomatuku at that time. Okay.
Can I ask one more short question?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
In our practice that we just did, you mentioned withdraw the winds to the heart. Is in my question is in the process of that, so say something erupts in our, say your ankle starts feeling sore or your back or whatever. So in that moment where you were advising us to, instead of sort of observing that, just withdraw
Yeah,
and go to the heart.
yeah. So
Okay.
generally in the Burmese tradition and other Theravada traditions, there's one advice when they're doing these long sessions of people watching the respiration, and if feelings arise, not to try to counter them, but just to let them play out, maybe to see their impermanence. You could do that also, but here in the Mahayana, when we are leading up to the meditation on the mind itself, we can think of withdrawing the winds that support the senses. You won't be able to withdraw them to your heart chakra right now without the aid of some other kinds of meditations, like Tumo or something like that. But you can withdraw them away from the door of the senses. So if the winds that support the eye consciousness are withdrawn a little, you're not going to be as distracted by visual things as the winds that support the feeling, the body, since the body consciousness. If you withdraw that away from to the place where the body consciousness is prominent, those feelings will not be so evident. If you were to be able to withdraw the winds completely to the heart chakra, you wouldn't, those senses would be inoperable, because even though your sense bases, the sense organs are still there, there is not the consciousness that is riding on those winds that would arise as eye consciousness or body consciousness and so forth. Okay. Yeah. Anyone else have a Dharma itch? Okay. So I wanted to just mention one verse from the Guru Puja, Lama Chopa, one that's is actually verse 92 in I think the FPMT version of the text. In Tibetan is Manam Chezung de la Kobe Lo Tai Yondin Jungwe Gortong Ne Droa Didak Dagi Dralang Kyang Sokle Chepa Simpa Jingilo. Does that sound familiar to anyone who recites it in Tibetan? I'm not sure. Paul, do you recite Lama Chopa in Tibetan or in English?
Usually English. Rinpoche. Venerable George.
Huh?
But you're also Rinpoche to me.
Yeah, right. You're precious to me also. John, do you ever recite in Tibetan, Lama Chopa?
I
Maybe
don't.
not.
No, I don't.
Most of us don't recite. I recite every day since His Holiness gave transmission many, many years ago. So this is a verse in English. The translation is something like this: having seen Tongne at the end of the second line, having seen that the attitude that cherishes mothers, my mother sentient beings, my former mothers, and would place them in bliss. So there's two aspects. But cherishes the mind that cherishes mothers, feels that they are very, very precious. And in addition to that, would actually go out of its way to set them up in bliss, in unchanging, everlasting happiness. Having seen that the attitude that cherishes mothers and would place them in bliss is the gateway leading to infinite qualities. is the doorway through which you would, by developing that mind that cherishes mothers and would set them in bliss, that's a doorway leading to infinite qualities, because through that kind of state of mind, one can practice the Bodhisattva's perfections, developing all the qualities of the Bodhisattvas. One can accumulate the collections of merit and wisdom, leading to Buddhahood. So the gateway leading to infinite qualities is that, having seen that, I seek your blessings to cherish these migrators more than my life, even should they rise up as my enemies. So that's also another crucial point. Even if they should appear as enemies at some time, maybe environmental enemies or political enemies or financial enemies, or, enemies to your happiness and so forth, the mind that would cherish them, going past the ordinary appearances of this lifetime, thinking that they are more precious than ourself, that we have cherished since beginningless time and has only brought us problems. And further thinking, I want to set them up into everlasting happiness, which set them in bliss. That's the doorway to infinite qualities, even if they were to rise up as my enemies. So at this time, when we seem to have in appearance in our mind many kinds of enemies, this is important to, even though we can't, even I know many of you are compassionate and work as much as you can to help other sentient beings, but it's good to rehearse, to try to practice in one's mind, in one's meditation, this sort of real practice of the Bodhisattvas. So when your mind is turbulent, upset by various things, to meditate like this, remembering that this state of mind that would go beyond the ordinary appearances, would cherish all sentient beings, even if they're appearing as enemies, and would, aim to set them in bliss, is the doorway, the entrance into infinite qualities. That's very, very useful. Okay, I wanted to just share that. Okay, so today we are at this section. We're on the 14th today, right? So we are at this section, rebutting the objections concerning other mental cognitions, on page 351 of Thupten Jinpa's great translation of the Gompa Rapsel, 351, on page 199 of Venerable Jones' translation. That's the FPMT official version. But just to review where we are. So just before this, the last section was rebutting objections against our refutation. And that had two parts: rebutting objections concerning other direct perceptions and inferential cognitions. That's what we've finished up till now, but we're going to review that a little. And then beginning today, we'll the second part, rebutting objections concerning other mental cognitions. So the previous section that we finished, rebutting objections concerning other direct perceptions and inferential cognitions. Remember, we've already refuted from Chandrakirti's point of view why it's unnecessary to have autocognition, reflexive awareness, self-knowing, however one translates it, refuting the Chittamatra view from Chandrakirti's point of view. And then we also had the tradition of Shantideva, how that was refuted in Shantideva's text, talking about the bite by the bite that the hibernating bear feels when he's just about to sit down, or she's about to sit down to hibernate. And then if that rat is actually poisonous, or that whatever way you translate that animal, small animal, that poison has been injected then, but it has not yet been experienced, and it's only experienced when the bear arises from hibernation. So that example we've talked about. So just to go over a little bit here, Tutanjimba's text said earlier, this is how we should proceed, that this is how we should proceed is stated clearly in Chandrakirti's clear words. And that quotation was, the classification of valid cognition is due to the objects of cognition. And it is through finding their own characters, through simply assuming the aspects of their objects of cognition, that valid cognitions are defined. So that was a tough verse. We mentioned that before. We gave some translations from Anne MacDonald's translation of that, also from Jose Cabezon's, and also from Venerable Jones' translation of that. So basically what we were saying is that if you talk about pramana, valid cognitions, or that which is valid, right? There are valid objects and there are valid cognitions that are apprehending those valid objects. The classification of let's say valid cognitions is twofold, because the objects of comprehension are twofold. They are the evident objects that are perceived with direct perception, and they are the hidden objects that are perceived, or subtle objects that are perceived by conceptual mind, that can be validly perceived by inferential cognition, valid inferential cognition. So we talked about that. And Lama Tsongkhapa had mentioned that the meaning of these sentences is this: the classification of valid cognition into two, perception and inference, so direct perception and inferential cognition. The classification of valid cognition into those is determined by the fact that the objects of cognition are determined to be twofold. And it is on the basis of how the aspect of an object appears to valid cognition that a valid cognizer comes to be defined as possessing its own character. That it comes to be, generally we say that a phenomena, the meaning of dharma, a dharma. Remember when we talk about the word dharma, it has many meanings. When we think about dharma, we might think that it means the teachings of the Buddha. When we talk about the holy dharma and so forth, or the worldly dharmas, those things that we depend upon. Dharma, one of the main roots of the word, is that which upholds. So that which upholds its own entity is sort of the meaning of when we use the word dharma to refer to phenomena. We say, all dharmas are empty of inherent existence. What we mean is all phenomena are empty of true existence. So here when it says, on the basis of how the aspect of an object appears to valid cognition, and it is on the basis of how the aspect of an object appears to valid cognition that a valid cognizer becomes defined as possessing its own character. So possessing its own character would mean that it comes to be understood as a phenomena. The significance of the term simply is to reject the following assertion of the Sautrantika and Chittamatrans, that valid cognition resembles and assumes the aspect of the object, and the object comes to be established through this, while valid cognition itself is established by a separate cognition. This is the view of the Yogacarans, a bare subjective aspect, or let's say an isolated aspect that is free from dualistic perception with respect to the valid cognition itself. So they're talking about a rangrik that is knowing it. That is to say, it is established by reflexive awareness. This is what the exclusive term simply precludes. In other words, cognition is established through the mere establishment of its object. So this is Chandrakirti's statement in the Prasanapada, that you don't need to have a reflexive awareness to establish the subjective mind as existing, as being a phenomena, as being valid. You simply have to perceive the object. In other words, cognition is established through the mere establishment of its object. This is what the main point there. And then there was a quote from Nagarjuna's refuting objections. Is that right? Is that the right translation? How do you call that? Averting objections. So this quotation says, if valid cognition is established by itself, so he's kind of anticipating the Chittamatra view, because when Nagarjuna was writing, it was much before Asanga, right, who championed the Yogacara view. So the Yogacara was not a established school at the time Nagarjuna was writing, but he was anticipating some kinds of concerns like that. If valid cognition were to be established by itself, like a self-knowing consciousness without depending on the object, then for you, the means of valid cognition will be established independently of the objects of valid cognition. Because self-established does not depend on others. Anything that is inherently existent or self-established does not depend on others. And that Lama Tsongkhapa explains simply, if the simple establishing of the object, which Prasangika says is enough, simply to establish the objects, let's say blue, is enough to establish the existence of the mind that's knowing blue. So we have to understand how that's done and how Prasangika sees that process as happening. If that's not sufficient for you, if the simple establishing of the object is not adequate to establish the valid cognition, and if valid cognition is established by itself, as you Chittamatrans believe, as claimed by the opponent, as claimed by the Chittamatra, the Yogacara, then a valid cognition can exist without depending on its object of cognition. Were this to be admitted, things could exist without needing to depend on other causes and conditions, so that they would not be dependent arisings. They would not be empty of inherent existence because they wouldn't depend on other causes and conditions. This is how Nagarjuna refutes self-establishment, and by way of implication, he also reveals how the mere establishing of the object of cognition establishes the valid cognition as well. So merely by establishing that you saw blue, you are indirectly establishing the consciousness that is knowing the blue. Remember when we say, I saw blue, there are two things that are happening. You're remembering the blue and remembering the consciousness that saw the blue. So in brief, Nagarjuna presents how the blue perceiving cognition is not established by itself through reflexive awareness as asserted by other systems. Rather, as he demonstrates, it's established by valid sensory perception, for its presence is known simply through the blue perceiving cognition establishing its own object. Therefore, all valid cognitions are established simply through the establishment of their objects. Okay. Does that sound familiar? We talked about that quite a bit. So, Richard, that mudra, so you've got a pain in the neck. That's, no? Does that sound familiar? Is that making sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Anyone uncomfortable with that so far? Suvash, are you up? You okay? Okay. So this next section now, rebutting objections concerning other mental cognitions. So Tubin-Jima's translation begins, in this Chandrakirti system, or in this Prasangika system, things like mirror images, as well as echoes, and so forth, are explained above, are as explained above. So previously we talked about how these various things like mirror images and echoes, even illusions, are actual form entrances for the mental consciousness. They are actual, considered to be actual forms, even though they don't exist as they appear. So in this Prasangika system, things like mirror images and echoes are, as explained previously, accepted as visible forms, sounds, and so forth. So mirror images are visible forms, echoes are considered to be sounds, and so forth. Well, generally we would say they were sounds. Furthermore, the Prasanapada, the clearly worded or clear words, says, again, this is Chandrakirti's composition, as for a double moon and so on, such things are not direct perceptions from the perspective of cognitions not affected by an eye disease. However, from the perspective of someone whose sight is infected, they are direct perception alone. So I think you have to understand what Jimpa's translating here as direct perception is ngunsum, right? So what is that in Sanskrit? Does anyone remember from last time?
That's is it pratyaksha?
Prakaksha, right?
Pratyaksha, yeah, pratyaksha.
Prataksha.
Pratyaksha, yeah. Direct seeing.
Yeah. So prataksha is what we have previously and in the lower tenets always translate, and Tibetan translates as ngunsum, always translate into English and the lower tenets as valid cognizer. It's talking about the subjective side that's knowing the objects. We say that is prataksha. But in the Prasangika point of view, that's not the main meaning of the word prataksha. Prataksha actually, it is the actual name of the objects of direct perception. It's the actual name of evident objects. That's a way that we can translate prataksha, evident. Do you know what that means? What does that mean to you, Jennifer? Evident. If something were to be evident.
I mean, I take the distinction as Prasangika is really saying it's to me it's related to sort of the two realities, even the faults, the faulty reality. It's evident to a certain perspective, but you can't say that it's absolute. So like to someone with double vision, the double moon is evident to them,
Right.
whereas
But what does the word, for you, what does the word evident mean? Just in common parlance, what does evident mean? If something is
just
evident,
manifest, to my perception, whatever that perception is. It's just manifest.
You say, well, it's evident that this car has been in an accident. The fender is bent, the window is smashed. That means it's perceivable. It's right there in front of you, or as you said. So in the Prasangika system, evident phenomena, prataksha, are also what are called ngongyur, or manifest phenomena. They are said to be synonymous. So generally in the lower tenets, we talk about prataksha being the subject mind that's knowing, and the objects that it knows are manifest phenomena, ngongyur. And here Prasangika is saying that actually the word that you're using for the subject is actually the actual name of the object. Those are actually evident objects, and you could also call them manifest objects, as you'd called before. So that's what's being talked about here. As for translating it a little differently from how Jimpa translated, as for a double moon and so forth, such things are not evident objects from the perspective of cognitions not affected by some sort of, well, he says eye disease here, Rabrip Chen. So Rabrip can mean any kind of distortion of the mind. It doesn't have to be a disease. It can mean any kind of distortion of the mind. As for a double moon and so forth, such things are not evident from the perspective of cognitions that are not affected by any kind of eye problem, like having double vision or pressing your eye. However, from the perspective of someone whose sight is affected by some source of error, they are evident alone. They are, just as Jennifer was saying, from the point of view of the person who is seeing the double moon, they are evident. They are manifest objects. So the lower tenets wouldn't accept them. Is it making sense? Okay, good. So in this regard, this quotation from the clearly worded is also from chapter 1. So Anne MacDonald's translation, if you happen to have that, of chapter 1 of the Prasanapada, hers is very scholarly and sometimes not quite so tasty, but usually pretty precise. So this is on pages 287 and 288 of her translation of the Prasanapada. So she translated that little section talking about the two moons. She said, yet with respect to the cognition of persons without the timura, that's Rabripchen, and she translates that as disorder. With respect to the cognition of a person without an eye disorder, a double moon and so forth are not prataksha. They are not evident. So to someone who doesn't have any kind of eye impediment, a double moon is not an evident object. They look up and they see a single moon. However, with respect to the person who have timura, this eye disorder, any kind of eye disorder that can cause a double moon, the double moon and so forth are indeed prataksha. Okay, so that's more or less the same as we said, but just to hear how Anne translated that. So continuing with Thupten Jinpa's translation here. So now Lama Tsongkhapa is going to try to unpack that. So he says, so this school of thought applies the term prataksha. Jinpa starts by saying direct perception because I'm not sure why. The whole point is to say that it's the Sanskrit term prataksha. This school of thought applies the term prataksha to objects such as forms and sounds in in actual terms. That's their actual name, and figuratively to the subject that apprehends such objects. So when we talk about names, there are actual names and imputed names. So once something is given a name, let's say the moon, right, is given the name the bearer of the rabbit. Remember that expression? That name, bearer of the rabbit, is the name of the moon. That's the actual name. And other names that are given to it are just imputed names. So from the Prasangika point of view, prataksha is actually the name of the object. And it's only indirectly named. It's imputed to the consciousness that knows those evident objects, but that's not the main name of the subject mind. So they are not. So you shouldn't really, from the Prasangika point of view, you shouldn't translate prataksha as direct perceiver or direct perception. You should translate it as evident object, and only indirectly you can use the name for this the subjective mind that knows those evident objects. In so doing, Chandrakirti explains how, although a distinction may be made from the perspective of ordinary worldly people as to whether things like the appearance of a double moon are objects of direct perception, right? So, from the perspective of ordinary worldly people, those who have some affliction of the eye and those who do not, the appearance of a double moon, you can argue for some of them it's a direct perception that don't have any kind of disorder, and for some it is not a direct perception. But in our system, however, even the appearance of a double moon is an evident object of direct perception. So even an eye that is afflicted by some error is still a direct perceiver of that appearance of the double moon. It's not a direct perceiver of an actual moon, but it is still a direct perceiver in terms of the appearance of a double moon. However, even the appearance of a double moon is an evident object of direct perception for those people. Therefore, regardless of whether such sensory cognitions are diluted by the standards of ordinary worldly convention, whether they are, someone says, "Oh, your eyes are gone, George. You're not seeing right." Still, the subject cognition is established simply through the existence of its object. Making sense so far? Sort of a little bit tough. Yeah, this is supposed to be subtle points. So let me read a little bit. Geshe Sopa had a lot to say about this in 2003. This is from July 26th in the afternoon. So I'll just read a little bit of this, and on Monday we'll go through some more. Usually for the lower schools, Geshe said, the term obvious or evident or direct, which in Tibetan is ngunsum and in Sanskrit is prataksha, for the lower schools that generally means direct perception, right? That's what we've been talking about. A consciousness free of conceptual thought. So prataksha refers to a mind which is free of conceptual thought. But here, Prasangika is establishing a different type of meaning of prataksha, of ngunsum. Whatever appears to any sense consciousness, whether it be right or wrong, whether it is mistaken or not, all of those objects, whatever appears, are obvious or evident. They are prataksha in the sense of being obvious objects, direct objects, manifest objects, evident objects. When an eye defect, with an eye defect, you sometimes see the two moons and other such things. You see two moons and other such things. Although actually there are not two moons, actually. The person with the eye defect might argue with you, but there are, you can, through other means, you can prove there is only one moon there. Although actually there are not two moons, eye consciousness sees the appearance of two moons and so forth with the people that have this defect of the eye. These appearances are not obvious objects in relation to non-defective consciousness. They are not obvious objects. A double moon is not an evident object to someone without that defect, right? So to someone who doesn't have an eye defect, if you look up the moon, you see a single moon. So it's not evidently a double moon, right? Remember the example I said before, like the car. It's obvious this car, it's evident that this car has been in an accident because you can see the damage to it. So it's not evident as a double moon to someone who doesn't have any kind of defective eye. So far, okay? This is more or less going over, but just making some other points that I think help to clarify a little bit. Then Geshe-la said, Munsum, or prataksha, also means direct, obvious, evident. That means without an image, without a mental image. So generally, conceptual minds are not prataksha from the side of their subjective side, because their objects are not evident. So an evident object means without an image. It means that you grasp the object directly without understanding it by means of a mental image. With conceptual thought, whatever object is held, always the same kind of image of that, a meaning generality first appears. Whatever kind of conceptual thought you have, let's say of a moon, so you try to remember your experience of a double moon or a single moon, you're not going to have you're not going to perceive that actual moon vision. You're going to perceive it through, you're going to know it, you can comprehend it, but you're going to know it by means of a mental image of that, not through the actual object appearing to you. And then it is grasped. You cannot hold directly. You cannot grasp the object directly. You cannot grasp the image of the moon directly, but you have to grasp it by means of its mental image. A meaning generality is like an image. For instance, you can be thinking right now that you are at home, maybe you are at home, or in your room, and you can imagine the size of the room. Geshe-la was talking in the temple, right? So people remembering that they're at home. I think all of you are at home right now. So for instance, you can be thinking right now that you are at home or in your room, and you can imagine the size of that room, right? My room is this big. And you can imagine the size of the room, the table, the bed, and so forth. You can think about those things. Here and there is such and such. Over there there's my kitchen, there's the microwave, and the stove is over there, and the counter is over there, and the toaster oven is there, and so forth. Here and there is such and such. Sight is this. It looks like this, and its color is this. You can think with conceptual thought. But it first comes through a mental image. Through that, you can hold the object. Without the image, vague image, you cannot hold the object with conception. right? But here, in the Prasangika system, prataksha, munsum, evident, doesn't mean directly all the consciousness, the objects of direct perceivers are also direct objects, obvious objects. Sounds, smells, tastes, and which manifest objects or evident objects. And here Geshe-la said to remind us that prataksha and mungyur. So I've forgotten what the Sanskrit is for mungyur. Do Paul or John, do you remember? Paul's probably got a dictionary there. He can check. Mungyur in Sanskrit. So munsum in Sanskrit is prataksha, as John reminded us at the beginning. So mungyur, usually we translate that as manifest. That's what the lower tenets usually use for the object of direct perceivers. What is that in Sanskrit, Paul? Do you see? Doesn't have?
I wonder if it is sakshat. Something like that. Sakshat.
Okay. Does it? Okay. This is
Yeah,
for.
I would expect abhi something for the nun, but yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see you later. So whatever is obvious is able to be seen without the need of any logical syllogism, without the need of logic. Something which is much harder in order to understand through logic, that is then different. But without depending on logic, directly perceivable things are called obvious objects, are called prataksha, or manifest objects. So the term manifest object that term was usually used in the lower tenets, where they reserve the term prataksha for the subjective mind, and its object is a manifest object. But here in Prasangika, we say that the object is actually prataksha. The word prataksha is only indirectly imputed to the subjective mind perceiving it. And so therefore, an evident object is what the lower tenets call a manifest object. I hope that's clear. Is that clear? Nadine, what do you think? Is this? Oh, okay.
Not completely clear, but I try my best to understand.
Okay. What do you think, Jennifer? You have your.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the manifest object. So if we say moon, is that, to me, that still implies a conceptuality because we're imputing like a yellowish glowing round orb of visual form onto the label moon. So I'm just curious from the Prasangika perspective, at what point, like, do they, like, what exactly, if we're trying to get really clear of like, the visual form versus the label moon, what exactly is the prataksha?
So, two things here. You were also talking about obvious, or as a I'm not sure if you use manifest. So just to clarify, when we talk about objects, we talk about manifest objects and hidden objects. So from the lower tenets' point of view, they use the word manifest object as the objects of prataksha. So prataksha meaning direct perceiver for them, lower tenets, and its objects are manifest objects. Hidden objects are not the purview of the direct perceivers, right? Hidden objects have to be first realized by means of an inferential cognizer, by logic. And then they can, some of them then can be perceived directly. But from the Prasangika point of view, the fact that the moon is a manifest object, that means it doesn't have to depend on logic to perceive. That's from the terminology of the lower schools. Prasangika says, oh yeah, that's true. It's a manifest object. It's not a hidden object, but it is also an evident object. That means that it is when you turn your attention to it, it presents itself directly to you. It is an evident object, and that is synonymous with a what did we call a manifest object? Okay.
And I think, thank you, Venerable George. I think my follow-up is though, when we turn our attention to it from an eye consciousness perspective, it's like a round, glowing yellow orb.
You say
And then,
you say the moon
or,
is
okay, dependent on the month and the hour. But so I guess I'm trying to so when do we shift from the white glowing orb to then the moon, and does that imply there's no logic or conceptuality whatsoever in that process?
So the eye consciousness is not involved in conceptuality at all, right?
Right.
When you perceive something, when you see the moon, an evident object with your eye consciousness, with prataksha, and you see the prataksha with the imputed prataksha, the subjective mind, then the mental consciousness subsequently, in the next instant, begins to think about that and make, say, oh, maybe give a name to that. Oh, that's the moon. I remember seeing the moon set over Beirut Harbor, and as Jennifer said, during the time when it's getting in the fog, and when it's getting closer to the horizon, maybe it looks more reddish or yellow. That takes place in the mental consciousness. When you give the name moon, that is done by the mental consciousness. John, what were you thinking?
I have a question, Venerable George, because I feel like I must be misunderstanding something. It sounds like they're saying that even something that is a mungyur, that is a manifest object for a mistaken consciousness, is also evident. It just happens to be evident, just happens to be incorrect. And so can a mistaken consciousness be pratyaksha for madhyamaka?
Yeah.
Because
with respect to the appearance of its object. So with respect to the appearance of the double moon, it's prataksha, but it's not prataksha. It's not a pramana. It's not a direct perceiver with respect to the actual single moon. It's only prataksha with respect to what appears to it. So all minds, whether they be mistaken or correct from the Prasangika point of view, are prataksha because they have evident objects. Remember, they're called prataksha. The minds are called prataksha only indirectly because they're perceiving an evident object.
Right.
What's the evident object to a mistaken consciousness that sees two moons? The appearance of two moons. You can't say the two moons don't appear to it. They definitely appear to it. So they're evident. They're from the Prasangika point of view, they're manifest. But from the lower tenets point of view, you wouldn't call the appearance of two moons a manifest object. For them, there is no manifest object of two moons. Okay, let me read a little. Yeah, you want to remind about taking a break. Okay, so let me just go a little bit further here. So so in this world, Geshe-la said, to objects such as forms, sounds, and so forth, to the obvious objects, the evident objects, these manifest objects, evident or prataksha is their actual name. Remember when I was talking about imputed names and actual names? The actual name prataksha refers to the objects themselves. Obvious is the real name, or prataksha is a real name. this area of where they show objects are to the objects. Sorry, I hadn't edited what Geshe said there. So they are the real names. They are the ngoming. So Ming, if someone asks you what your name is, usually was how do you say what's your name in Tibetan? Does anyone know? Oh, Nadine knows.
Gerangi Ming Kareret.
Oh, that would be very impolite. You would say, Karangi
And
Sen Karishugu. What is your title? Then you would answer, you yourself more simply would use the word Ming, right? Ngay Ming, Nadine. So the actual name is the subject, and the subject mind is only imputed with the name prataksha. Now, the actual name, the imputed name, actual name means the name. The word is the actual, as it says here, true, the actual name. That's the actual name of, let's say, the actual prataksha is the actual name of the evident objects. It's not the actual name of the subjects. It's only imputed to the subjects. An imputed name means just this kind of situation where you give the name of the object, prataksha, to the subject that's perceiving it. So it is not the real name, but it is imputed that way. For example, some of the texts talk about lagden. What is lagden? It's a Tibetan word. If I were to say in Sanskrit, Karin in Sanskrit and lakden means, lak means limb, right? Like hand can be called lakpa, or one of your limbs are called lakpa. Den means having. So actually, elephant is called lakden because its nose, or what do you call it? Trunk? No, what
Yeah.
it was?
the trunk. Yeah, the trunk.
The
Yeah.
trunk. The nose is called the trunk.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So so yeah, having a trunk is the name of an elephant. And for instance, soke. What is soke? So that usually we translate that as waterborne. That's the name of the lotus, right? So lakten is the name of the elephant, that which has a limb, has a trunk, and soke is the name of a lotus. Even if a lotus is born in the soil, there's no water and it's dry, it's still called soke. Okay. Sanskrit word lakten, lakpa means hand or arm. Lakpa dandempa means possessing a hand, possessing a limb. That everyone, humans and animals, everyone possesses limbs. But the word lakten means mainly for the elephant. Elephant has some kind of trunk functioning like a hand, like a limb. So therefore the name is given to it as lakten. So therefore lakten is the name for the elephant. Others called lakten are imputed name. So if you say, who can I say? Rachel has limbs, has all her limbs. She has her legs, she has her hands, she has all her limbs. So she is lakten. That's just an imputed name because lakten, the actual name lakten, is reserved for the elephant, where anything else is an imputed name. The same way that prataksha is reserved for the object And anything else, such as the subject that perceives it, is only an imputed name. That's the point that's being made here. Okay. Lakten is only a name for the elephant. So in terms of soke, that's the name for lotus, right? The Saroruha. Does that sound familiar? I'm pronouncing that right, John? Saroruha, born from the lake, lake-born, water-born, means born in a lake, lake-born or water-born. That is the name for the lotus flower. That's the actual name for the lotus flower. So when you give that name, that's reserved for the lotus flower. So everything from a lake cannot be called soke, cannot be called waterborne, even though the fish are born from the water, the algae are born in the water, other plants are born in the water. That name, the actual name soke, is reserved only for the lotus. Those fish are not soke. They are some other and other plants and so forth. Those are not soke. If they say soke, that is just imputedly named. So if you say that the fish are born in the water, that's just that they are waterborne, that they are soke. That's only an imputed name for them. The real actual name soke is reserved for the lotus, even though it's not born from water, even if it's not born in water. But even if it's kamlekeba, means born from something else, somewhere else, they are still called soke. They're waterborne, because they are the lotus. Any lotus is called that Saroruha, Saroruha. Does that translate to waterborne in Sanskrit? Which means which? Saroruha. Paul?
I think John's Sanskrit is better than mine, but I think isn't ha the softened form of ja? So sorrow,
Right.
yeah, something like that.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
So sorrow. Let me
It's your
see.
homework.
Yeah, I have to look it up.
That's your homework. Figure out his names. So Chandrakirti says, Geshe-la finished up by saying, Chandrakirti says in the clear words, those objects which obviously appear to the sense consciousnesses, such as forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and even reflections and so forth, and echoes, all of them are actually obvious objects. Those objects are all prataksha. And they are manifest objects to that consciousness. Those are the actual ngunsum gida, the main word, the meaning of the name ngunsum. That's the actual functioning thing. And ngunsum meaning the consciousness perceiving that, such as the eye consciousness, the sense consciousnesses themselves, are only imputedly named ngunsum from the Prasangika point of view. Although in the lower tenets, it's always the subjective mind that's called ngunsum or called prataksha, and the objects are called manifest objects. To them, to the sense consciousnesses, to the subjective minds, ngunsum is an imputed name. They are in an imputed way. They are not obvious. They are not easy to realize or not easy to understand. This is the explanation saying in the context indicating, okay, anyway. So anyway, that's some commentary of Geshe-la.
So
This-
what does determine the lower school for the object if the mind is prakshaksa?
It's ngungyur or
Mm.
manifest. And that's where I was asking my two Sanskrit scholars here what the Sanskrit is for ngungyur. I would think it's in one of the dictionaries there. Maybe
Yeah.
you're not spelling gyur right, whether you have an ow prefix on the gyur.
No, Paul tracked it down. He was right. It's an abhimukhi, just like the Bodhisattva ground.
Avimukti, of course. So the sixth ground, right? The sixth ground is called what? Does anyone remember? Do you remember, Richard, what the sixth ground is called?
Not in Sanskrit.
No, no, in English.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Don't know.
We got
The manifest?
yeah, yeah. So sometimes it manifests or directly facing. So that is so directly facing is abhimukta. So mukha or mukta, it means mukha means face, right? Mukta means facing, abhi means directly. So the sixth ground is called abhimukta and is also called the manifest, munsum or prataksha, because the one is directly facing the higher qualities of the ground. One is already on the sixth ground. Has one already realized emptiness directly or not? Is it only in the sixth ground that you realize emptiness directly, Richard?
Oh boy. I'm going to.
You have one phone call.
Yeah, right. I don't think so. I think it's in the seventh ground, isn't it?
Oh,
Nope. Sorry.
Louise, what?
Wait, isn't that a trick question? You have to have realized it in order to get on the grounds.
Yeah,
Did you
it's
realize?
first ground that you have a direct realization. So what you're directly facing is not the direct perception of emptiness, but it is something talked about more subtly there in the beginning of the sixth ground. You can go back to the beginning of the sixth ground when it's talked about why it's called abhimukta there. But here, so now my short-term memory is forgotten. What was the gist of what we were talking about here?
The name of the lower school for the object.
Oh yeah, yeah. So for the lower schools, the object of prataksha, the mind that is a direct perceiver, is an obvious, is a manifest object, a abhimukta object, something that is directly facing you. So we have, for the lower schools, you would have prataksha as the subject and abhimukta as its object. For the prasangika, the object is actually called prataksha, and you can call it abhimukta because it's directly facing you. And only indirectly, the subjective mind is called prataksha, is called, yeah, direct perceiver. Okay, so just let me finish that paragraph, or maybe we have done that. So this school of thought applies the term direct perception, prataksha, to objects such as forms and sounds in actual terms, that's their actual name, and figuratively, indirectly, to the subject that apprehends such objects. In doing so, Chandrakirti explains how, although a distinction may be made from the perspective of ordinary worldly people as to whether things like appearances of a double moon are objects of direct perception. So they would say they're not objects of direct perception. In our system, however, even the appearance of a double moon is an evident object of direct perception. It's, that to that person who sees two moons, that is an evident object. Therefore, regardless of whether such sensory cognitions are diluted by the standards of ordinary worldly convention, the subjective mind, the cognition, is established simply through the existence of its object. Okay, before we take a break, I'll just read this. Now, someone's going to, so this is sort of like a qualm. If someone were to say, those of you who do not, you prasangikas like Chandrakirti, I'm talking to you, and the Sautrantikas that follow, scripture or whatever, that don't or follow reason, do those of you who do not accept reflexive awareness, this is sort of Chittamatra talking, right? You will not be able to establish the instances of mental consciousness, Jimpa says, of the ordinary ground. We'll go into this for a second. This is, it's not the word ground, like when we talk about the grounds and paths or ground. What is that word for ground? It's bhumi, right?
Bhumi.
Say bhumi. Even the field is called bhumi, but the grounds are called bhumi or sa. We talk about the 10 grounds, the sachu. So here the actual word is shidu. Shi means basis. So I'll explain Geshe-la's commentary about that in a minute. So those of you who do not accept reflexive awareness, this is Chittamatra talking, will not be able to establish the instances of mental consciousness of the time of the basis that are diluted in relation to their objects of perception and conception. This is because there can be no establishing of the subject merely through the cognizing of their objects. Okay, so that we're getting into some, again, a difficult point. So we'll take a little break. You can regenerate. Yeah, good to see you. Thank you. Did you have a question, Louise?
Yeah. So the subjective mind is always a remembering mind, as per
No,
the Prasangika. No?
subjective mind is not. The subjective mind itself is the mind that's knowing the object. That's the subject, right? When you have an object, a yule, and you have the yulchen. The yulchen means the subject. That refers to the mind, the subject. That's not necessarily a remembering consciousness.
Okay.
What we talk about, how to establish, how you can prove that mind was actually knowing the blue flower or seeing the bare trees. When you want to try to prove that, establish that, because that's kind of the meaning of one of the meanings of an object is that which is established by valid cognition. It has to be established. It has to be proved in order to be called an object. And even the mind itself, although from its point of view it's a subject, that is an object also of investigation. In order to prove that, in order to establish that, you need to have some way of establishing that it exists, that it is true. Okay, more coming. Okay, so let's look at this again. Let me see here. We go, yeah, read that. So here, is in Thupten Jinpa's translation, he says objection. So it doesn't, in the Tibetan, it doesn't say objection. It just says, I think it says gelte, doesn't it? No, it says ongkyang. So sometimes at the beginning of some question, it'll say gelte, if someone says, or here it says ongkyang, but, and at the end of that phrase, it says shena. So, well then, if someone says, let me read what Jimpa has said there. Those of you who do not accept reflexive awareness will not be able to establish the instances of mental consciousness of the ordinary ground. So I'm not sure where Jimpa was, what he thought ordinary ground meant. Anyway, you will not be able to establish the instances of mental consciousness of the ordinary ground that are deluded in relation to their objects of perception and conception. This is because there can be no establishing of the subject merely through cognizing their objects. So if you just leave off the middle part there, it makes some sense, but what is it meant by ordinary ground? So Geshe Zopa had explained, I think, quite clearly here. So let me again quote Geshe-la. This is from July 28th, 2003 in the afternoon. Those who do not believe in self-awareness, the Chittamatrans say, cannot prove the existence of the subjective mind because they don't comprehend the object of comprehension. They don't know or measure it because they are completely perverted consciousness and the appearing mental consciousness at the time of the basis. So this is what Thupten Jinpa talked about. So what did he call it? Ordinary ground. So the actual Tibetan says, Shidugi Yiki She. No, sorry. Duki Ki Yishe. Get it out correctly? Shidu Ki Yishe. So literally that means she means basis, like when we talk about kunshi. What is kunshi? Anyone know?
Alaya Vijnana.
Yeah, right. Right. So Geshe-la is saying that the she here is referring to kunshi. So when she do means period or the time. Shidu gi yishe. Yishe means mental consciousness. I'm not sure how Jinpa ended up with the ordinary ground there. So Geshe-la said, those who do not believe in self-awareness cannot prove those. They don't know or measure it because they're completely perverted consciousness and the appearing mental consciousness at the time of the basis also probably they don't believe. Mental consciousness at the time of the basis itself. Geshe-la said, I don't know. Mental consciousness at the time of the basis is inattentive cognition, inattentive perception. So what does that mean? He's talking about alaya vijnana. Remember alaya vijnana? Does alaya vijnana is one of from the Chittamatra point of view, Yogacara point of view, there are how many consciousnesses?
Eight.
Rachel, did you put up 8 fingers, Rachel?
I said 7, but okay.
So there's the 6 regular consciousnesses that all of the schools accept, the 5 sense consciousness and mental consciousness. That's 6, right? Then you add to that the alaya vijnana. How should I pronounce that, John? Sanskrit.
I think it's alaya vijnana, yeah. Alaya vijnana, yeah.
And the diluted consciousness, which is which is the 8th consciousness. So there are 8 consciousnesses.
I think it's the other way around, Venerable George. I think the seventh is the.
Oh, yeah, I was talking about the enumeration. I was just saying,
okay, yeah.
There are 8. So predominantly here we're talking about, Geshe-la is talking about the alaya vijnana, where we said, I don't know. Mental consciousness at the time of the basis is inattentive cognition. So what I was saying is, alaya vijnana, does that know objects? What is it? What is alaya vijnana or kunshi?
It's the storehouse.
Storehouse, right? That's one meaning. There's 2 meanings of the alaya vijnana. There's the alaya vijnana as a storehouse upon which all of the karmic imprints are imprinted and so forth. All of the seeds that ripen into the subject and object that are actually coming from the same seed, they're all imprinted on the alaya vijnana. But alaya vijnana is also a consciousness. It's also a subjective mind, right? So that subjective mind, what does it know?
So Venerable George, from what I remember, it perceives something, but it has no clarity to it.
Maybe, yeah. It is. It doesn't know any objects that are presented to it. So it's not knowing the alaya vijnana that's present when you're perceiving the trees or a blue flower. It's not perceiving those. It doesn't have any mental factors like that either. So Geshe-la said, mental consciousness at the time of the basis is inattentive cognition. So that means things are appearing to it, but it doesn't pay attention to them. So therefore, like Savash is saying, they're unclear to it. You know, like at the opera, when you're focusing on the music, your eye consciousness is perceiving the movement of the actors or the operatic, what do you call them, the singers and so forth. But if you're totally focused on the sound, the actual movement will be inattentive to you. You saw it, but you weren't paying sufficient attention to be able to remember it in some cases. Or the example I like, when the meat and potatoes American man is watching the Super Bowl, and his wife says, his girlfriend or his partner says, it's time for food or something like that. They don't eat. They're inattentive to that sound because they're so focused on the football game, right? So alaya vijnana is like that. It is an inattentive perception, a consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained. The Yogacaran view, in the Yogacaran view, mental consciousness at the time of the basis is alaya vijnana. So Geshe-la clarified that. That from maybe Thupten Jinpa was not aware of that when he was translating. So when it says Shidugi Yishe, the mental consciousness of the time of the basis, that's actually another name for alaya vijnana. It says consciousness not knowing. Oh, sorry, where is that? Yeah. Mental consciousness at the time of the basis is inattentive cognition, a consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained. In the Yogacaran view, mental consciousness at the time of the basis is alaya vijnana, which is a consciousness to which an object appears but is not known, is not ascertained. And then at that point, Geshe-la quoted from a famous text called the 30. What's the 30, Paul? You're nodding.
That's Vasubandhu's 30 verses on cognition only.
Yeah, I'd forgotten it was Vasubandhu. Thank you for that. So Vasubandhu wrote several texts on Chittamatra. Remember, Vasubandhu was the brother of a Sangha. Vasubandhu originally was maybe trained in the Vaibhashika and then studied the Sautrantika and wrote his Abhidharma Kosha as a critique of the Vaibhashika, sort of encyclopedic explanation of the Vaibhashika system from the Sautrantika point of view. But he also, due to the influence of his brother, Asanga, he entered the Mahayana and then wrote many texts about the Yogacaran system, the Chittamatra, one of which is called the 30 stanzas. And so this is quoted in, some of you may have this text by Gareth Sparham, the Kunchi Kadel, the difficult points of the alaya vijnana. I think, I'm not sure anyone here has held it up before. I remember Mikhail had that text by Gareth Sparham. So this verse is quoted in the difficult points of the alaya vijnana. This is a text by Lama Tsongkhapa explaining, not surprisingly, the difficult points about alaya vijnana, Kunchi Kadel. So this verse says, Deni Dani, Lempa Dakdang Ne, Nampa Rikpa Marikpa. So basically it's saying it is consciousness not knowing appropriation and abode. Lenpa means taking up or appropriating or abode. It says consciousness not knowing. This is referring to alaya vijnana, right? That means many things appear to alaya vijnana, but it doesn't know them. That means they are not ascertained. Its nature is that the object appears but is not known. It doesn't know anything. So this is what the actual meaning of what Jimpa translated as ordinary ground there. This is what it's talking about. If it's said, this is a problem with those who do not believe in self-awareness. If someone says, that's what this objection is. If you don't believe in self-awareness, you've got some problems, buddy. If you have self-awareness, if you have, reflexive awareness, they say, it knows the subjects themselves. You don't need to prove to oneself by knowing the object of comprehension. If you don't accept reflexive awareness, self-awareness, then they don't have the object of comprehension. So therefore, you cannot prove the subject itself. You're not comprehending the subject without Rangrik, they say. You cannot prove the subject itself by proving the object of comprehension. That is what someone says. If that question arises, so that's the context of what that objection is. Sean, what do you think?
I was just wanting clarification on what he meant by the term time of the basis.
So what do they say in different areas? They say a term of art, right? So if you're skillful in the Yogacaran system, that's another name that's given to alaya vijnana. So it's the period of the basis. So alaya vijnana in Tibetan kunshi. Shi means, we say the basis of all, kun shi, right? So the time of the basis or the period of the basis is referring to the period in which that alaya vijnana is perceiving objects, I think. Okay. Okay, so let's go on. So now the reply to that. Okay, so that was the objection. You need to have kunshi. So Lama Tsongkhapa is answering here. Let me respond to this. He says, is that what he says? Dila Shepa Jate. Yeah, I'm going to say something about that in Tibetan. I have something to say about that. Since this system of Chandrakirti, since this Prasangika system accepts no additional consciousness outside the six classes of consciousness, right? Besides the five senses and the mental consciousness, it doesn't accept the deluded consciousness nor the alaya vijnana. Since in this system, Chandrakirti accepts no additional consciousness outside the six classes of consciousness, only two types of valid cognition are possible. Okay, why? Valid cognition contingent upon physical sense faculties and valid cognition based on the mental faculty alone. Okay, so there's only, because we only accept six kinds of consciousness, the first five are all sense consciousnesses, right? The sixth is mental consciousness. So since if you talk about valid cognitions, they have to be one or the other. They have to be valid cognitions based on the senses or valid cognition based on the mental consciousness. So he says valid cognition, pramana, valid cognition, contingent upon, based upon the physical sense faculties, and valid cognition based upon the mental faculty alone. Also, when it comes to valid cognitions, clear words, the Prasanapada, mentions 4 kinds. We just briefly mentioned this before, and I mentioned the list would come later. And so this is where he mentions the list. So clear words mentions there are 4 kinds of pramanas. Generally, clear words also mentioned, and in the Pramanavartika said there are only 2 kinds of pramana, right? What are the 2 kinds of pramana? Nadine, do you remember?
Direct and inferential.
Direct perceivers and inferential cognizers, right? So, but here in clear words, it also mentions 4 kinds of, those are direct perception, direct perceivers, inference, meaning inferential cognizers, right? So you can't say inference is a valid, well, inference, you have to, I think you have to say inferential cognizer. Direct perceivers, inferential cognizers, then valid testimonial knowledge and valid analogical knowledge. Analogy, kind of, depending on an analogy. This is based on Nagarjuna's averting the objections and its commentary. So have you heard of those before, the four types of valid cognitions? What do you think? So, whoa, let me put my glasses on here. So we have direct perception. That means prataksha pramana. Inferential, in the Tibetan, it just says J. So that's short for Jepak, valid cognizer. In Sanskrit, that's anumana pramana. Those are the 2 that we generally include all 4. So we say prataksha pramana. So that's a valid direct perceiver. And anumana pramana. Anumana is referring to inferential cognizers, so inferential cognizers that are valid cognitions. Then the third of the 4 categories are valid cognizers of scriptural authority. This is using Venerable Jones' translation. So in Tibetan, that's lungitsema. Lung sometimes means oral transmission. Lung can actually mean, is that the same word that means wind? Lung of
No, that's
no,
Ra Ladatala.
right. The wind element has a Ra superfix on the La, so it's spelled differently. It sounds the same, maybe slightly different in Lhasa dialect, but here it's more commonly known in Sanskrit as Shabda. Shabda means what?
Word, usually.
Yeah.
I always thought it was agama, which means scripture.
Yeah.
Lung, yeah, lung, yeah. But here the actual in the Tibetan, it's saying lungitsema. It's saying lung not in the sense of agama, but in the sense of testimony of something which is was said by someone in authority. So shabda or testimony. And the 4th one are called valid cognizers that fully comprehend. This is Venerable Jones' translation. Ngerjal. Actually, that shouldn't be translated as she had translated there as fully comprehend, but Ngerjal, the Nger doesn't mean fully, it means almost. So it's Nirjal means a likeness. So it's talking about analogy or likeness, or that which is comprehended through example. Nirjal lam. The lam is how you put the word or between two words. If the previous word ends in L, like gel, then you would, to say you would say lam. Pejel, peljewe, pejelwe, sema. So upanama means a comparison or resemblance, an analogy, a simile, object of comparison. This is based on Nagarjuna's refutation of objections and its auto-commentary. What do you think? You follow it? I hear someone say something. Yeah, John? You're trying to
I follow. I don't see. I'm on the edge of my seat to find out how upamana could be a source of valid knowledge that is not an inference, because I only know that in terms of like in literature where they talk about something being a figurative, it's a metaphor. So you say the moon-faced child because their face is like a moon. It's obviously not a moon, but it gives you a poetic picture of what that face is like.
Right.
And I don't know why that would be included.
Right. So the testimony is more commonly understood first. Let's address that first. So generally, what we talked about is when you have when you talk about the kinds of pramana, we say that there are direct perceivers and inferential cognizers. So inferential cognizers generally have to be used to realize what? Hidden objects, right? Hidden objects. What about deeply hidden objects? Like the fact that a particular karma will ripen in a particular effect in the future. Only the Buddha knows those deeply hidden phenomena. So deeply hidden phenomena can only be known in reliance upon of the testimony of a valid person. So you have to first prove that Buddha is a valid person. And as I've mentioned many times in our course, the main way that we can prove that the Buddha is a valid person, besides recognizing his, the history of his developing bodhicitta and so forth and being amazed by that. But the main way that one recognizes the Buddha as a valid person is by yourself following the teachings, realizing emptiness, abandoning your delusions. Then you have unwavering certainty that the Buddha was a valid person for teaching this hidden phenomena that no one else teaches, selflessness and emptiness. Everyone else says, there's a self, man. There's real things out there. Once you realize that, you have unwavering certainty in the Buddha as a valid person, and therefore you can depend upon his testimony about other deeply hidden phenomena, such as relationship of karma and its explicit effects, right? Making sense? Okay, Nadine nodded slightly. Yeah, okay, that's good. Rachel, what do you think? Is it making sense? Doris has given thumbs up. Okay, that's okay. Sure. Okay, so not so difficult there. So when we talk about knowing deeply hidden phenomena, you have to depend upon the testimony of a valid person. That's generally what's being referred to. So in Jake Garfield's presentation, and they just finished, I think, last week, he gave 5 or more talks, including this kind of thing. When he talked about testimony, he talked about you can rely on your your dentist or your doctor who's an expert in some field. You can look at their credentials and determine that they have a certain kind of validity. That's not sufficient to call someone a valid person. Many times the dentist tells you one thing or the doctors tell you one thing, and then later it's determined it's exactly the opposite, right? I'm sure you know. So someone even with those kind of credentials, you have to be able to determine someone is a valid person on more strict criteria than that. So, but John's question about the analogy, let's see first of all what is said here when it says that the last two valid cognitions, that is by testimony or analogy, that they are encompassed, that they are included within inferential cognition, as I said before. Say, for instance, the proving that the testimony of the Buddha is reliable depends on ascertaining that the Buddha is a valid person. And then as a result of that, you can know, you can, how to say, validly know that the testimony of the Buddha is valid because you've already ascertained him as a valid person. But the fourth one, this is the one in question. So that the last two valid cognitions are encompassed within inferential cognition is stated in the following in Chandrakirti's commentary on the 400 stanzas. So remember, these maybe 4 or 5 great commentaries he wrote. So he wrote the Prasanapada, he wrote the Madhyamaka about fundamental wisdom. Then he wrote a commentary on the 400 stanzas. That was the text by Aryadeva. And he wrote a commentary on refuting objections. Is there another great one that Chandrakirti wrote? Those are the 4 main ones I'm thinking of right now. So here is quoting his commentary on the 400 stanzas. So this, Jimpa translates this, not all things can be known through direct experience, right? Some must be cognized through inference. That's not too surprising, right? Venerable Joan translated, not all things are comprehended by a directly perceiving consciousness. Some must be conceived by an inferential cognizer. That's more precise, actually, and more exacting. Then Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on that says, within the class of perceptual valid cognitions, so that's talking about when you talk about direct perceptions, that could be the senses, but also there are some in the mental consciousness that are valid, that are direct, right? You directly realize emptiness and so forth, or directly realize subtle impermanence. Within the class of perceptual valid cognitions, of the 4 types asserted by other schools, Chandrakirti rejects reflexive direct perception. So what is this? Is this, when it's talking about the 4 types, is that talking about these 4 types that we just talked about, 4 types of prime cognizers? No, it's talking about, for instance, when the lower schools say there are 4 types of valid cognitions, they say there are sense direct perceptions, mental direct perceptions, reflexive awareness direct perceptions, or self-knowing direct perceptions, and what's the 4th one?
Yogic
direct perception. So these are the 4 that are being talked about here. So within the class of perceptual valid cognitions, of the 4 types asserted by other schools that we learn in low rig, that included self-knowing direct perceivers, Chandrakirti rejects reflexive direct perception. He accepts yogic direct perceivers. Chandrakirti also does not agree with how the mental direct perception is defined in the Buddhist epistemological texts. All right. Do I have something there? He does not assert mental direct perceivers as they are explained in the texts on valid cognition. That's what Venerable Jones said. In his commentary on the 400 stanzas, for example, oh, Nadine is just leaving. Okay. In his commentary on the 400 stanzas, for example, in explaining the meaning of the statement in the Abhidharma scriptures that each of the 5 sense objects, such as form, are to be known by the senses and mental consciousness, he states the following. This is where we're going to finish. I'll just read this. So this is in Chandrakirti's commentary to the 400 stanzas. So he's got Aryadeva's root verses and his commentary to one of those verses. And I'm not sure I have here. Yeah, so this is actually commentary to verse 268 of the 400, or in other words, chapter 11, verse 18 of the 400 stanzas, which is the chapter on refusing truly existent time, or refuting truly existent time. That's the name of that chapter. So here, Chandrakirti's commentary on one of those verses there says, it is not that one object is known by 2 types of consciousness. Rather, that which arises first, which is sensory consciousness, directly determines the object. The subsequent cognition does not perceive the object in a manner of direct engagement. It arises and apprehends its object through the force of the preceding sense consciousness. And when this happens, we designate the latter, the mental consciousness, also as having consciousness of that object. So this is where we're going to begin next time. Yeah, what do you think? Yeah. Was this a tough topic, or actually everyone agrees this is a difficult topic to understand. The fact that you're not all completely bemused is I have to feel admiration that you have a good accumulation of understanding of so many different things that you're able to understand at least what's being talked about. Okay, so before we finish, any questions? Any clarifications that are needed? Anna, how are you doing?
Well, thank you so much for your explanations. To be honest, I think my head twists when you talk about the Chitta Mantra, and I'm back on track with the Prasantika. So when you compare them, I'm so glad you keep repeating. Especially, I find the Yogacara school difficult.
Okay, that's good. Mintu, you just showed up. Are you okay? Mintu very kindly sent some links to the Theravada monks that were traveling. I think some of them from Vietnam, Mintu?
Yeah, I think so. I think the head monk was actually a software engineer, just like us. So I started thinking, wow, he's such an inspiration.
What kind of engineer?
Software engineers.
Oh, software engineer. Okay. Are you actually outside, or that's a picture behind you?
It's the pictures.
Okay, good. Yeah, so, okay, so let's dedicate the virtues that we created. So you might say, what virtues? I was just bemused. We tried to set a motivation at the beginning. The inertia of that, whether our mind became distracted or not, should have been sufficient to create some virtues. And of course, our minds were virtuous during these times. So due to these virtues, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha, one who can spontaneously, effortlessly, and without error lead sentient beings out of suffering into everlasting happiness. And as a result of that, lead all beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then as a dedication, actual prayer, but thinking, due to these virtues, may the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen in my mind and the mind of others arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. So the words in my mind and the mind of others is not explicitly mentioned there, but that's the intention when the commentary is given of that verse. And then for the prayer for the quick return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's smiling face, peerless teacher, an assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratika Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite realms, please bestow here and now the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. In upholding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you, Lama Zopa, wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, I make requests. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the victorious one's teachings, the conqueror's teachings, and exclusively for the welfare of mother living beings. It sounds like the contradiction is for two things: striving exclusively for these two things, the welfare of the victorious one's teachings and for the welfare of mother living beings. You suddenly departed to peace, at which point I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truths of the oceanic blessings of the Triple Gem and the great waves of bodhicitta of the Bodhisattvas, by that truth, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for us fortunate disciples. And finally, for all of our gurus, past, present, future, our primordial gurus, you who are my eyes for viewing all the infinite scriptures, supreme gateways for the fortunate ones traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means, moved by love, moved by mercy, illuminating spiritual friends, I make this request. I request you to live long and stable lives. Okay. So thank you for your perseverance. Yeah. So we will go over this on Monday. We'll delve into some of these knotty details. So those of you, Minto, you should come some Monday. It would be nice to have your.
I have work.
Oh yeah, you have your iPhone up, and don't you have one of those screensavers on your thing that when your boss comes by, you can press a button and have a spreadsheet come up on your screen rather than the. Anyway,
I'm always at work, Mintu.
Yeah. So I look forward to seeing some of you on Monday, hopefully next Saturday. When is New Year, Tibetan Losar? Is it this coming week?
Yes.
So that those who come on Monday will talk a little bit about Losar, but Losar, Sar means new, Lo means year, that is coming on the 17th, Tuesday the 7th.
18th?
Is that right? Oh, that's the Lunar New Year. Losar is on the 18th, yeah. So my calendar, my Apple calendar says Lunar New Year on the 17th, but the 18th is Losar, the Wednesday. So that is also one of the days of increasing merit in our actions. So if you can prepare your house the night before, clean up your room, and get everything arranged, it's said to be very auspicious. So look forward to seeing you either Monday or both Monday and Friday, Saturday. Take care.